Without a doubt, cultivated hydrastis must command a good commercial return. In this connection, I again plead for government and state intervention in such directions as this. If it is proper to preserve a lingering group of bison, or search the land over for our vanished wild pigeon, why is it not proper to conserve, with the help of the strong hand of authority, America's valued flora from absolute extermination?
John Uri Lloyd wrote and spoke firmly about the need to conserve wild medicinal plants in the ecosystem. Ginseng is a familiar medicinal plant, so is OSHA. But Lloyd was a 19th century pharmacist who was particularly fond of hydrastis. You probably know it as Goldenseal. Through the lens of Goldenseal, we see a major contradiction between how we've historically used medicinal plants for our health versus how we manage and conserve these dwindling resources for future generations. Following the ethos of John Uri Lloyd and other conservationists is United Plant Savers, an organization devoted to protecting wild medicinal plants in their natural habitat.
I'll start with the fact that I think it's very ironic that the herbal supplements industry is touted on healing ourselves. And if we're going to destroy the very environment that we live in to heal ourselves, I don't think we are really healing ourselves.
If they knew that the herbal medicine they were taking was harmful to biodiversity, wouldn't be interested in taking it.
I want to highlight the most recent article that came out just this year in Herbalgram, Goldenseal's conservation status. It has just been listed on the IUCN Red List as vulnerable, noting that its population is in decline, some say by over 50%.
Goldenseal is at risk in the wild, and there's a correlation between the habitat loss, the deforestation here in the eastern U.S. where it's native, and its presence in the wild. And then there's also the overharvest of it for wildcrafting and commercial medicinal use.
Appalachia is home to most of the plant's population. It especially likes northeast slopes near tributaries of the Ohio River. Cincinnati is home to the Lloyd Library and Museum. The Lloyd is a leading center for plant-based science and conservation in the U.S.
The library was actually started by three founders, the Lloyd brothers. The name that you're probably most likely to hear in relation to the Lloyd brothers is John Uri Lloyd. He was the oldest of the three brothers, and all three of them actually started off by apprenticing as pharmacists in the 19th century. Lloyd was the first one to do it, John Uri Lloyd was, and he apprenticed in the middle of the 1860s during the Civil War. And then later his brothers and he became partners in a pharmaceutical firm starting in the 1880s. So what the Lloyds did that was really noteworthy as far as the history of medicine and pharmacy in the U.S., and especially in regards to our collection here, is that the Lloyds did specialize in the use of plants in medicine. Made a number of product lines, the most famous of which was called Specific Medicines. That was a series of very strongly concentrated plant extracts, and these were things that they sold to the pharmaceutical trade starting in the 19th century, going into the 20th century. And the Lloyds did have a number of different products that they used in there, including things like lobelia, echinacea, goldenseal, things like that. And the Lloyds also created a research library, which exists today. But together they left their mark on natural products and natural medicine in the United States.
Goldenseal is kind of iconic to American herbalism with the beginning of the eclectic movement in the United States, which sort of has its roots in the early Shaker communities that would gather medicinal plants and sell them. All this knowledge coming from traditional communities, indigenous communities of North America. You really see Goldenseal being a plant that appears in our pharmacopoeia of medicinal plants of North America early on, and it becomes really an iconic plant that has medicinal uses from, some say, antibiotic, to also treating stomach ailments, to cleaning out as an eye wash. It has a whole array of medical properties that are really unique to the plant.
The exorbitant price now demanded for Hydrastis is altogether owing to ordinary man's improvident disposition and destructive vandalism.
Of course, Ohio was mostly forested, so a lot of that's been converted to agriculture and later into urbanization and suburbia. Also, the clearing of forests for various reasons, timber. The iron industry was very big in southeast Ohio, so forests were cut for charcoal for the iron furnaces. It was growing in where it was drastically changed. The non-native invasive species invading our last remnants of forests, especially in the western part of the state. The same type of soil that Amur honeysuckle prefers, the limey soils, are the same habitat soils that Goldenseal likes.
There being seemingly little prospect of cultivated Hydrastis drifting into the market in the very near future in quantity sufficient to bring the price to a good normal condition.
Goldenseal's widespread availability and known benefits increasingly puts pressure on wild populations. Forest farming programs are created to encourage growing and discourage wild harvest. They're gaining traction, but not at a rate that will fill demand. The roots take years before they're ready for the market. About 300 roots make a pound, which trades for just $30 to $60. The low price keeps finding and pulling more attractive than cultivating. To learn more about forest farming, I headed to Meigs County and the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary.
Our mission is to conserve at-risk native medicinal plants and also to ensure an abundant supply of these plants for the herbal products industry. Sales of herbal products in the United States topped $8 billion. Most of the native medicinal plants that are used in the herbal products industry, at least the ones we advocate for, those are coming from the wild to supply that industry.
Without a doubt, cultivated Hydrastis must command a good commercial return.
There aren't too many people growing it commercially. The economics of wildcrafting or digging these roots from the wild, there's no overhead there, right? I mean, you go out into your private land or a national forest. If you can afford a screwdriver or a trowel or a sharp stick, you can grow these roots. Whereas if I wanted to farm these roots, I would have to have a piece of land that I either own or have permission to use. If you're a wild harvester, eliminate that overhead, you have a lot more profitability than farming it.
A big issue is that the herb trade in general is very secretive.
The spike in methamphetamine use in the late 90s and today's opioid crisis are connected to more pounds of Goldenseal being illegally picked from the wild, according to both the Department of Natural Resources and United Plant Savers. But some people wildcraft sustainably and responsibly for personal use or for income, especially in economically depressed regions in rural Appalachia.
One can imagine that if you're doing this out of desperation, you're likely going to take more than you should from a wild population, and at what rate of return that population's going to need time-wise to replenish itself is likely in the time scale of decades.
So what? What's at stake if goldenseal disappears? Why should we care about this one plant or any single plant in the woods?
Well, we should care because they're part of the ecosystem. And I mean, they have a role that if that species disappears, there's other species that will be impacted.
I mean, going forward, if we've created a world where, you know, we need these plants again, the way that the Lloyd brothers were using them, you know, in the traditional sense, I think they'll probably be pretty important in the future.
With things like the superbugs and these bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, it may be that goldenseal might be the one thing that we turn back to.
By advocating for a native forest medicinal, we're advocating for biodiversity. We're advocating for intact, mature forests. You know, these are things that like not only goldenseal needs, but we need, humans, right?
Really, what he was writing in 1912 could be just as relevant as today, which to me I find really fascinating. History does repeat itself. We're not really taking a proactive role in how we can address these issues.
At the Lloyd Library, we found a copy of The Cultivation of Hydrastis.
The exorbitant price now demanded for hydrastis is altogether owing to ordinary man's disposition and destruction and vandalism.
The present scarcity is unnecessary, but promises to be cruelly lasting. There being seemingly little prospect of cultivated hydrastis drifting into the market in the very near future in quantity sufficient to bring the price to a good normal condition. Without a doubt, cultivated hydrastis must command a good commercial return. In this connection,
I again plead for government and state intervention in such direction as this. If it is proper to preserve a lingering group of bison or to search the land over for our vanished wild pigeon, why is it not proper to conserve, with the help of a strong hand of authority, America's valued flora from absolute extermination? I mean, he doesn't mince words. We most definitely, as a nation, should prioritize the conservation of our flora. And certainly those economically important medicinal plants should be of highest priority. And yet there's very little effort to move in this direction.
If everybody starts doing that, gathering from the wild without replacing or intentionally cultivating, the plants really aren't going to last.